The second major critique from Morozov is that the internet is not just democratic for those who like democracy. It's not just a democratic structure that helps those people who like freedom, who favor democratic discourse. It is democratic in structure, but that ultimately helps everyone. And this ultimately connects with something that he refers to as cyber-utopianism. The idea that the internet favors the oppressed rather than the oppressor is marred by what he calls cyber-utopianism, which is the naive belief in the emancipatory nature of online communication that rests on a stubborn refusal to acknowledge its downside. He goes on to talk about the idea that it stems from this starry-eyed digital fervor of the 1990s that we've already talked about, when former hippies, growing out of that 1960s era, by this time ensconced in some of the most prestigious universities in the world, went on an argumentative spree to prove that the internet could deliver what the 1960s couldn't, which was to boost democratic participation, trigger a renaissance of moribund communities, strengthen associational life, and serve as the bridge from bowling alone to bowling together. In short, Morozov is suggesting that many people believe that the internet is only going to be used for good, but ultimately it can be used any way that any users want. And so there are a couple great examples of how this reality of the democratic nature of the internet helps those people who are far from democratic in terms of the way we think about it politically. The first is known as the Silk Road. And the Silk Road was, up until recently, the most extensive, the most sophisticated online marketplace for illegal goods and services that existed. People buying and selling drugs, as you can see here, thousands and thousands of different types of drugs that were purchased and sold by tens and hundreds of thousands of users. Ultimately, there were also services available, such as people soliciting people to be involved in criminal activity, even potentially people hiring others to put a hit out on other individuals. The Silk Road was a great example of how the structure of the internet allowed for not only anonymous individuals to do illegal activity, but it allowed for people to overcome geographic barriers. We've talked about this previously with the idea that you no longer have to live next to the people that you wanted to associate with, that you wanted to talk to, and potentially to be involved with in terms of a political activity or political organization. But in this case, it allowed people all across the world to connect to others who were interested in buying or selling illegal services or illegal drugs. It was a pretty amazing example of how the how the democratic potential of the internet could be used for negative or illegal activity. As of October 2013, the Silk Road, which was previously invisible to the vast majority of internet users, was taken down by the FBI, no longer exists, and many people are suggesting that this will essentially end the hidden internet that exists sort of under the surface that you need to navigate to find. I believe that different activity like this will continue, but the Silk Road was potentially something that marked the peak of something like this website existing at this scale. It's still a fairly remarkable thing in the history of the internet, and showing that it's not all good in terms of the democratic nature and the democratic structure of these tools. Second is the second example is really the idea that extremists of all kind can meet online. Whether you're talking about extreme political polarization, right? People focusing on just the far right or just the far left. Ultimately, the internet allows for people to only watch news and only watch clips and only read information that supports their view if you want, what we refer to as the echo chamber, right? You can only focus on that. When you talk about politics, this can be frustrating, this can lead to a lack of discourse, this can lead to a lack of any ability to compromise and get things done. But this can also be said for extremism in the form of neo-Nazism, in the form of hate speech, hate groups that are able to find other like-minded people across the country or around the world. To take it one step further, the internet has been used as an extremely powerful tool for terrorist organizations. And we're going to pause here so that you can take a look at just how important the internet was as a democratically structured tool that was used as a recruiting tool, as a propaganda dissemination tool, and ultimately as a very powerful resource for Al-Qaeda. As you watch this video and as you think about these other examples of extremist or illegal activity happening online, think about whether you think that this is acceptable. Do you think that the internet should be censored in certain ways so that these organizations, so that these people can't do what they are doing? Should it be allowed? Should governments play a role? We've looked at the role of the state and the power of the state as trying to censor the internet, trying to minimize politically unpopular voices, or to minimize the voices of groups that are politically marginalized. Think about it also as an issue of free speech and free expression. Should sites like the Silk Road, or should neo-Nazi hate speech, or even Al-Qaeda be allowed to express their opinions online along the same lines of the way that the ACLU supported KKK's marching in various marches throughout the country? The idea that we have this marketplace of ideas, and the internet is the greatest marketplace of ideas that has ever existed. Ultimately, how do these examples affect the overall question of whether the internet has a democratizing effect?